Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
Before we start, I want to acknowledge that this conversation was recorded on Guyamigal and Garigal country and to pay my respects to elders past and present. Today's episode is a powerful exploration of what it really means to align your work with your values and what becomes possible when a business is brave enough to take a stand. My guest is Hilary McAllister, Activism Manager at Ben & Jerry's Australia. Now, most people know Ben & Jerry's for its ice cream. Fewer know that the business was founded by two hippies with a deep belief that business could and should be a force for progressive social change. And even fewer understand what it looks like day to day to lead activism from inside a global brand. Hilary's path to this role has been anything but linear. She began her career in events, followed her growing concern for climate and the environment into grassroots activism, and she went on to co-found a not-for-profit called 4 Wild Places, all before stepping into her current role at Ben & Jerry's. In our conversation, Hilary shares what drew her into activism, how serendipity and shared values shaped her career, and why aligning your work with what you care about isn't always easy, but is always worth it. We explore Ben & Jerry's long-standing commitment to social justice, why climate justice is the focus of their work here in Australia, and how the brand partners with grassroots campaigners to create real-world change, not just awareness. Hilary also takes us behind the scenes of one of their most successful Australian campaigns, the thinking behind their brand voice, and how they navigate criticism while staying true to their values. And we go deeper into the idea of mission lock, what it means, why it matters, and why Ben & Jerry's continues to stand as a rare example of a business that has protected its social mission, even within a complex corporate structure. At its heart, this is a conversation about love in business. Love for the planet, love for community, and love expressed not through words but through action. I hope it leaves you feeling informed, inspired, and perhaps a little more courageous about the role you and the organisations you're part of can play in shaping a better future. Let's get into it. Hilary, welcome to the For Love and Money podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Caroline. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Our signature question is there a role for love in business? What do you think?
Well, I guess it depends on how you define business. If business is creating a society in which everyone can live out their fullest potential on a healthy, thriving planet, I think absolutely. That is our life's purpose. But if you think of business of making money, well, I think sadly there's a lot of love lacking from that side of business. And honestly, I think it could do with a lot more love to turn it all around.
Absolutely. I love that you answered, it depends how you define business, because a lot of people answer, well, it depends how you define love. So I love that perspective that you've got the focus on business, which is brilliant. So who is Hilary? You've built a career. I was looking at your background. You've built a career at the intersection of advocacy, activism, politics, and purpose-led brands. Looking back, can you share with our listeners the key moments or experiences that led you to where you are today?
Yeah, it's an interesting exercise. I guess when I started the role with Ben & Jerry's earlier this year, I kind of was like, how did I even get here? Like the fact that there's a role that's got the title of Activism Manager is wild in itself, let alone me being the right person to do that job. And I guess I'm somewhat new to this world. I guess since about 2020, I was one of those COVID, people who was forced to take a bit of a look at my life and reassess things pretty severely. But I think the more I think about it, it definitely goes back to my childhood growing up on our family farm in northwestern Victoria, very much amongst nature and at the mercy of the elements, with my dad being a farmer and being very reliant on the climate and the weather. So I think it's definitely always been ingrained in me, from camping holidays to witnessing the millennium drought and the impacts that climate has on people's livelihoods and their well-being. And we didn't really call it this at the time, but mental health as well. But then, I guess, like many people, I went to school and university and had a lovely time and pursued the creative arts, which I really loved, and worked in the event industry for quite a while. But I guess as I got towards my later 20s, I started to feel a bit uneasy about the work that I was doing. And I guess climate was becoming more of a commonplace topic. We had the Adani, that was my first protest to stop Adani. And I guess that started to reignite in me some of those values around caring for nature and making sure that we have a healthy planet to live on. So when COVID happened and put a swift end to my event design career, it was, I guess, an open opportunity to find work or ways of living that's allowed me to live in line with my values. And I guess I had a lot less. I moved out of Melbourne. I was living with my parents. So money became not as important because I didn't need a lot of it. So it, I guess, allowed me to pursue things that were more for the love than for the money. And I guess I've kind of been doing that ever since, in terms of getting good at living with less. So that way I have more freedom to choose work, whether it be paid or unpaid, that really fulfills me. And I've just been lucky that I don't necessarily believe in fate, but I do believe in, I guess, karma to a degree. And, that if you put hard work in, if it is unpaid, eventually that will come back in some positive way. And I ran for the Greens, and that when someone got elected, it meant I could get a job working in politics, which was such a fantastic opportunity. And then, from there, it was the next kind of stepping stone was when this job with Ben and Jerry's came up. And in some ways you look back and think, wow, I've been crafting my CV for this one role that I didn't even know existed. So yeah, there's definitely a bit of timing and luck, but also a lot of hard work in there.
What is that expression, that success is where hard work meets good luck, or something? Hard work meets luck, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, I don't know, a bit of faith as well in knowing that if you're doing good with good people, that they'll, look out for you and good opportunities will arise. And I see that happening a lot because, I feel like people want to support others who want to do good for the world as well. So it definitely works both ways.
You have the dream job of so many people I know. So COVID was the catalyst that, ended your events career, but I'm sure there are many skills that you've brought from that career into what you're doing now. How did you actually come across, how did this job come onto your radar? Because I know there'll be many listeners who are like, but how?
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing as well, is that sometimes these things arise in your life when you're not even looking, and that was definitely the case with me. So back in 2020, I was one of the co-founders of a non-for-profit called For Wild Places. We essentially a bunch of trail runners who want to see the places that we love to explore protected. And it all started down in Lutruwee to Tasmania at a Bob Brown Foundation event called Takana Trail in March of 2020, when I'd recently been laid off and I guess discovered this community of like-minded outdoors people who wanted to see places like Takana protected. And we left there, basically flew into Melbourne, and it was all lockdown from then on. So the timing was incredible because there was lots of us who were at a bit of a loose end in terms of we couldn't do anything. We weren't going into an office. We all had a lot of time. And I guess For Wild Places became our outlet to maintain a sense of purpose during a very tumultuous time. And I'm still very involved in For Wild Places. I'm still the CEO there and one of the remaining co-founders. And I reached out to Ben and Jerry's because they had been involved in a campaign that we're very involved in. and said, "Hey, I see you've taken an interest in this campaign in the Pilliga Forest to stop the Narrabri coal seam gas project. Would you be interested in, being a part of it with us?" And I got a reply from my now boss saying, "Well, actually, our activism manager has just left and we're looking to fill the role. So, we'll let you know when someone will be in touch." And I was like, tell me more. So yeah, it's one of those things it was advertised on Seek, but I wasn't looking. Usually, I don't go looking for jobs on Seek if ever. But there you go. I wouldn't have found out about it if I wasn't already doing the work. So it's like I said, one of those serendipitous things that you look back and think it was just right place, right time.
100%. And doing what you love, being driven by what you care about and doing what you do through For Wild Places. I met your co-founder the other day at a dinner event we ran, and the other piece of coincidence there was one of our other guests, Saxon Wright, who's been a guest on this podcast. He is co-founder of Pablo and Rusty's, but he was co-founder and CEO of Husky. Apparently, he sponsored one of your events and ran in it as well.
Yeah.
So good people find each other, right?
Exactly. It's just amazing. And that's what I love about all of the roles I've had in this kind of purpose-led space is, they're working relationships, but there's so much more. So, and that they go a whole lot deeper than a business relationship ever would, because it's grounded in purpose and passion, and that you're all fighting for towards the same outcome. So even though you might meet someone in passing, instantly that you've got a very deep-rooted connection, which, is just worth its weight in gold.
It's shared narrative, and I think there's nothing that expresses it better than Seth Godin's concept of people like us. People like us believe things like this, and it's that identity, that shared narrative, which is so, so powerful, and the energy behind collective movements of positive change. So yes, we're seeing that play out. So Hilary, Ben & Jerry's. So for someone who everyone will know of Ben & Jerry's, but for someone who perhaps just knows them for ice cream, can you explain a little bit about who Ben & Jerry's is and what they stand for?
Yeah, so Ben & Jerry's is obviously most known for its delicious jam-packed ice cream with all of the funky flavors. But it's interesting, there's a great book called Double Dipped, which was written by Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield, the co-founders of Ben & Jerry's, which is, I guess, their startup guide. And reading it is just absolutely full of so many amazing facts that just show how they were just two self-confessed hippies who wanted to start a business together, and they were going to do bagels, but the equipment was too expensive, so they landed on ice cream. And essentially they just wanted to have a product so they could share progressive messaging and social change within their community through storytelling, through a product. And they've always brought their own flavor to it. Like every year after the first year of being in business, they had Free Cone Day where they gave everyone free ice creams, and that still exists today. When it was 1976, so I'm terrible at maths,
Didn't
but however many years that is.
Trend?
Yeah, exactly. And for them, it was just, they were just so grateful to the Vermont community for supporting them and helping them keep, the doors open for that first year, that it was a genuine gift of appreciation. And the little morsel that I loved that was, if you were visibly pregnant, you got 2 scoops, but everyone only got 1. So it just speaks to their, they've always been progressive, just fantastic people who have brought the fun and irreverence of the brand into everything they do. And, they've always said that we're an activist brand that just happens to make ice cream. And I think that it's very ingrained within the brand in the States, but not so much in Australia. And I really see that as part of my role, is to make sure that people, love our ice cream, but they're also aware that by eating our delicious ice cream, they're helping power our campaigns to get climate justice in Australia and to start to, there's lots of work to do here. There's also lots of work in other markets around the world. We have 6 activism managers in Europe, America, and Australia, and we're all working on big, big issues in a space where business often is too scared to really speak up as well.
Yeah, so 6 around the world, including you.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very small group, but it's a very hardworking group, and it's fantastic to spend time with them and to throw ideas back and forth. And in some ways, I guess in Australia, some of our problems aren't as nasty as, what's going on in the States and the EU at the moment. But at the same time, it's really nice to feel part of a global movement as well. And I guess utilizing the resources of a global team in a market like Australia is just so beneficial as well.
Absolutely. So I saw you speak recently at the annual gathering for B Corp certified businesses, the Assembly Retreat. And the session that you were on a panel session, and it was about collective action not being optional. I think, do businesses have a moral obligation to act? So clearly the answer for you was yes, given, your role speaks to that. But you mentioned that different global regions focus on different issues. Like you said, gas in Australia, criminal justice reform in the US, refugees in Europe.
Yeah.
How do you determine which issues matter most in the Australian context?
Yeah. So broadly speaking, the general themes in each of our major markets, it's social justice in the US, refugee justice in the EU, and then climate justice here in Australia. And I'm not sure when those were set in, but for better or for worse, they've remained incredibly relevant to each of those areas. And I think that we definitely colour outside the lines, when we choose to. But I guess it's one of those things where there's so many issues. And I think the same goes as an individual. Like, there's so many things to care about that caring about everything is just going to tie you in a knot, and you'll just end up in the fetal position on the ground thinking, there's just too much to do. So, like with me as an individual, I've chosen to pursue climate, environmental justice as my path. And I am very grateful to everyone who's fighting the other crises that exist in Australia and globally. But having that broad, I guess, view in Australia in terms of climate justice, that is a very large umbrella. And we are, I guess, not selective, but it is, I think anything can come down to climate justice is the long or the short of it in terms of what we choose to spend our time on. So find it very hard to say no sometimes when someone comes up with a great idea or a campaign. But unfortunately, there's only so much budget in in each year and so many resources. But trying to make sure that what we're doing is partner-led. And I think that's what we really pride ourselves on at Ben & Jerry's is it's not about us, it's not about the brand. We invest in activism because it's part of our DNA, not because it's seen as corporate responsibility or, it's just what we've always done. So in a really lucky position to do it. I mean, yes, we want to see results, but those results aren't KPIs or that kind of thing. It's like we want to see numbers of signatures. We want to see environmental change. We want to see progressive change. And we also know that that's not a linear journey. So it can be very hard to track your impact sometimes. And occasionally you get a win and you've got to take the time to celebrate that and acknowledge that. But there's also a lot of other things on the backlog that need our attention all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. But I think what really stands out with Ben & Jerry's is this whole idea of business can be such a powerful vehicle for change, for positive impact. And it's not understood. It's not leveraged. It's not tapped into. I mean, more and more businesses are doing it, but that is the reason for being for Ben & Jerry's. So it's such an interesting case study. I'd love if you could share with us an example of one of the campaigns you've run in Australia.
Yeah, so this year's been, I guess, somewhat more quiet since I've been behind the reins, but our previous activism manager, Steph, one of the larger ones was around gas, like you said. an offshore gas project that was proposed down in Victoria, or between Victoria and Tasmania. And interestingly, I was aware of Ben and Jerry's work on this because I was working on it from the Greens in Victoria's side. So, it's one of those things as well. It's many cuts is what it takes to actually get cut through on these things. So Ben and Jerry's work with Surfrider Foundation, which is a global movement but has a very large presence in Australia, to create a documentary called Southern Blast, which was a very evocative, beautiful, but also, I guess, startling truth of what is seismic blasting, because offshore gas is out of sight and out of mind, and seismic blasting particularly it happens in the oceans, so we don't see it. Just a little ship on the surface, and all of this stuff is happening underneath the waves. So it was, I guess, a way to becomes a resource that people can share and see and understand the problem, because that's the first job of any campaign is to identify the issue and make sure that people are feel empowered to take action because they understand what the problem is, but then what the solutions are as well. And they organised a bunch of screenings all along the East Coast from Lutruwita up to Sydney, and showed this movie and had discussions around, how to take action, and also had a lot of other groups that are like-minded come along and have a stall. So it's, it's kind of like pick your flavour of ice cream, but pick your flavour of activism. Is it Parents for Climate, or is it, the local energy renewables group, or is it Surfrider? There's lots of different, activism takes lots of different forms, and we need all of them to make this change. So that culminated in a huge paddle out, which I attended, but sadly, by the time I got to the Ben and Jerry's ice cream, they were all sold out. So, it's a popular.
You had to paddle out.
You've
for
got to
the
get
ice
in quick,
cream,
I've learned. Yeah. Yeah, but that got a lot of media, and maybe 4 or 5 months later, TGS, who was the proponent that wanted to do the world's largest seismic blasting project, sent out an email consisting of about 4 sentences, which to the TLDR version is, "This is too much effort. We give up. See you later."
Success.
And it was just incredible. And, it's one of those things that you never know what ticked it over the edge, but that it was a culmination of all of the campaigning from Surfrider and all the other ocean-based organisations to really get it over the line. And I think what I'm excited about bringing to Ben and Jerry's is that our product is fun, and so much this within the environment and climate movement, it can be just really hard work. It's never ending. It's unrelenting. Like I said, the wins are often few and far between, but we sell a really fun, delicious product that appeals to all demographics. So how can we utilize that to, basically throw a better party than the people trying to destroy the world? Like we really want to, bring that irreverence and fun that Ben and Jerry have had since day dot to the work we're doing in Australia, because it's important work, but it also has to be fun at the same time.
I love that. And I love that, you see the role of the brand as not being the hero, but educating and empowering your customers to actually take action. How do you turn fans of ice cream into activists and advocates for impact?
That's a great question, and that's something that we're constantly working on. And we have a pathway that we call Always On Activism. So we utilize our social channels to, I guess, drip feed information to people who follow us. We like to call them our fans. So that way, we're not just popping up every 3 to 6 months with a campaign, but we're always in their feeds, bringing them, I guess, like you said, our focus is on gas and eroding the social license of gas. And there's lots of different ways, different approaches we can take to do that. So it's storytelling, sharing information in a very digestible and approachable way that tries to, like I said earlier, like empower people with information, so that way they can feel like they understand it, and hopefully spark a conversation with someone in their life to say, "Oh, did did you see this post from Ben and Jerry's? Like, can you believe that Santos and Woodside don't pay any tax? Like, that's ridiculous. And rather than it just being something we do on a, like I said, a campaign basis. And it's interesting, you always get people who like to chime in the comments and tell you to stick to making ice cream and that climate change isn't real and all of that. But you just ignore the noise and keep steady and just hope that, we obviously look at, the metrics and that kind of thing, but that's the beauty of this being ingrained in the work we do. It's not like, oh, this content's underperforming, we're going to can it. It's like, no, we're here for the long game. Like, we need to maintain this conversation with our fans, 52 weeks of the year, because the problem's not going away and neither can our attention to it. So, it's something that, is not a perfect solution, but it's something we're trying, and it's something we're constantly reflecting on and changing and trying to meet people where they're at and to make it feel like an inclusive movement rather than something that is, unattainable or inaccessible. Like, like I said, there's lots of different flavors wherever it comes, and we're just trying to offer a certain flavor that might appeal to some.
Before we dive back in, a quick word from me. If you're enjoying this conversation, you might want to know that I work with leaders and organisations on how purpose becomes a powerful driver of trust, performance, and resilience. I speak at leadership conferences and company events about how purpose shows up where it matters most, in leadership, in culture, and in strategy, helping organisations grow with clarity and confidence in a changing world. You can find out more at my website, carolynbutlermadden.com. Now, back to the episode. Do you think the fact that the brand is, irreverent and playful, I just wonder if that gives you latitude to play in this area or to engage people more than a straighty 180 brand might be able to do?
I think so. I think we try to make it that way because it is, like you said, if your brand or organisation might be a bit more, not necessarily conservative in the conservative sense, but in terms of what you say and how you say it, we're lucky in that we love a good pun and, making up words that sound like a Ben and Jerry's flavour or whatever it might be. And I think that's, I think comedy and not taking yourself too seriously, especially in Australia, is a really admired trait, whether you're at an individual level or a brand level. So I think it's, not taking yourself too seriously is important. And I think that there's room for both. Like, we've partnered with the Climate Council on some things because, their demographic is very different to what ours is at Ben and Jerry's. But the things that they put out, such high quality researched communications, that we want to kind of translate that to our younger ice cream eating demographic and vice versa. So it's like I said, there's not a wrong or a right way, but there's just lots of different people and we need to say things in a lot of different ways to meet people wherever they are.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I think I remember you saying at the B Corp event on the panel that where you get your, on social media, people criticising you or bashing you, that your policy is not to respond. You allow your fans to respond on your behalf. Is that right?
Yeah, precisely. So, which makes everyone's life a lot easier, I think. I don't know, I'm a bit of a sucker for punishment sometimes. I like to go on some of our Facebook posts and just look through the comments, and I'm very grateful that it's not up to us to respond. I know that there's particular laws in Australia that obviously, require you to make sure that it's a safe place and there's a level of not necessarily respect, but, safety there. So I guess we do that to a degree, but we're lucky in that when we have fans, we have like super fans who are all in when it comes to the brand and our activism and what we stand for. So like you said, they do our work for us in a fantastic, genuine way that means that, we don't engage. And I do see sometimes, other brands engaging in a way that is in some case is hilarious. But at the same time, I feel like it's a slippery slope when it comes to the comment section on any social media platform. And we're very lucky that, we can just leave it up to our fans to pitch in. And at the end of the day, the work that we're doing, we believe in it, and a lot of other people do too. And no matter what you do, there's always going to be people who disagree. So, once again, like think of Seth Godin, like you can't please everyone. So who are your true fans, and making sure that you're aligning to them, and then just shutting out the rest of the noise, because otherwise you'll be careering all over the place with no North Star, and no one will know what you stand for anymore.
That is such a strong position to be in, and I think every brand manager's dream to be able to be in that position, but you're living it, which is amazing. Now, again, at B Corp's Assembly, you mentioned that you were preparing for COP31 being hosted in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
This was, about 2 months ago, I think it was. And it's now been agreed that Turkey will host it, with Australia's Chris Bowen leading the negotiation. So what does that now mean for the work that you were planning, that was in development?
Yeah, so we were, I guess, very much waiting on our partners to, like everyone, to see what was happening, and then I guess back them in and support the work that they wanted to do in the lead up to COP31. So in some ways that hasn't changed. Different organisations will get involved to different degrees. I think with Chris Bowen as the president, there is a real opportunity for Australia to play a considerable role, and I think the pressure needs to be maintained and probably ramped up a bit in terms of, what outcomes we want for our First Nations people and our Pacific neighbours. But I think it has left a bit of a COP-sized hole in our back end of 2026. So we are checking in with our partners to see how they're feeling. There is a lot of disappointment within the movement, which is very understandable, and we're definitely feeling it as well in terms of the potential that was there. But I think the fire in the belly is still very much there, and if anything, it's stronger than ever, because we've missed an opportunity. So how do we make up that ground in other ways? And so it's checking in, it's having conversations, it's seeing what other pathways can we take, where are our resources the most useful and the most effective, and trying to, I guess, stay positive as well in terms of Australia's targets and contributions and commitments and that sort of thing. So I think if anything, for me personally, it's been like, okay, that was a missed opportunity. How do we redirect? And that's one thing I love about the climate environment movement. They're dealt a lot of blows, but very resilient and always committed to the task at hand, and not being like, oh, well, that's gone, we give up now and we'll take our picnic and go home. It's, the fight never ends.
You can't give up, can you? Not with something so important. And yet there are so many setbacks. The resilience is incredible of the people who are directly fighting for this. I want to talk a little bit about partnerships. You mentioned Surfrider, and you said, you get a lot of approaches, but what do you look for in a partnership?
Yeah, so I guess we've had the groups that we work with in the past, and that is pretty broad. Like I said, Surfrider Foundation, 350.org, Seed Mob, Climate Council. They're just off a few off the top of my head. But we, I guess, look for, and I said this at Assembly, like we look to work in areas where we've earned the right to speak. And I guess that also goes to, trying to stay on task in terms of what our direction is and not straying too far out of the lines. For example, we, were involved in the Yes campaign because that was obviously something that we believe was very important, even though, and it is fundamental to climate justice as well. But at the same time, for partnerships, it's honestly, we're open to it. Well, I'm open to anything and everything that kind of falls under that umbrella. But at the same time, can be difficult because we support in different ways, but also it still requires the partner to do a lot of the heavy lifting. Like, it is still their campaign, and coming from the non-for-profit side myself, like that in itself, that need for resources can be difficult as well. So it's also trying to find partners who are in a position to take on something that, might be the biggest campaign that they've worked on, for example, in terms of scale, but have the resources to see that through and to make it as good as it can be. Because yes, we support, but there's a lot of work that goes into these campaigns on the edges as well. So I guess it's trying to find that balance between supporting smaller and medium-sized organizations and larger ones as well, but I guess trying to use our resources as effectively as possible and making sure there's a real clear call to action that is, I guess, tangible to our fans. Because we also have about 25 scoop shops across Australia. There are, ice cream stores, and we try and involve them in our campaigns, which is really powerful. But also, it's kind of in a transaction when you're purchasing an ice cream, the scooper might have 10 seconds to ask them if they'd like to sign a petition. And how do you, summarize a huge campaign into a would you like fries with that equivalent? Can be really difficult, but it's also really valuable because a lot of these problems that we face are big and hairy and juicy, but how do we summarize it into its purest form so we can communicate it in a, transactional conversation over an ice cream counter? And I guess we're looking for partners and campaigns that our franchisees and our stores can get behind as well, because yes, we are we're a global company, but all of our franchisees are small businesses that are locally owned. So we want to make sure that, they not necessarily feel comfortable, but we all need to feel uncomfortable to get progressive change, but that we make it tangible so that way we can have cut through all the way from our socials and paid media all the way through to a conversation at a scoop store.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Ben & Jerry's is famous for something quite rare in a big corporate business, which is a mission lock, which obviously those who understand what it means to be B Corp certified would know that that's part of becoming certified. So for Ben & Jerry's, it meant that when Unilever acquired the business, what was it, 20 years ago or something like that, the founders negotiated an independent governance structure that legally protected Ben & Jerry's social mission, even under corporate ownership. And it's one of the strongest examples of mission protection in the world, I think. So recently, there's been a bit of discussion about co-founder Ben Cohen stepping away from the independent board at the same time as Unilever is considering selling its ice cream division. I'd love you to speak to, the questions that come out of that. What does it mean for the brand? How is Ben & Jerry's, thinking about protecting the integrity of its social mission as it goes through this period?
Yeah, so it has been I've seemed to have come at just the right time for everything to, go into an immense period of change. But so basically, like you said, Ben & Jerry's sold Ben & Jerry's to Unilever in, I think it was like 2000. And yes, they created an independent board of directors, which is the Ben & Jerry's board of directors, who there's a fantastic podcast called Business Wars between Nestle and Unilever, which I highly recommend for anyone who wants to understand the nuts and bolts of it. I listened to it just before I started, and I was like, wow, I don't understand big business, but this is just like, this needs to be a movie type plot line. But in the more recent years, Unilever made the decision to basically carve off all of its ice cream brands and create a new company. So it hasn't been sold, but now we are owned by the Magnum Ice Cream Company, with Magnum being, I guess, amongst all of our ice cream brands, one of the largest, hence why it gets naming rights. But so this has been, I guess, in the pipeline for a little while, but it has understandably caused some ripples because Ben & Jerry sold Ben & Jerry's to Unilever, and now the business that they sold has, moved across to a completely new entity, and with that is a lot of question marks. But as part of that, basically the sale agreement in terms of the independent board remains in place. And just to clarify, Ben and Jerry aren't on the independent board of directors. They, I guess, were employees of Ben and Jerry's, and, you know, it was up to them how much they wanted to be involved on an individual level and that sort of thing. But the board of directors sits separately. And yeah, earlier this year, unfortunately, Jerry made the decision to step away from the company. I guess he was an employee. He was a familiar face at our head office in Vermont, and obviously incredibly well loved amongst the team. But it was very, I guess, sad to see Jerry go, because he is obviously such a legacy to the brand. And in some ways, it hasn't changed how we operate here in Australia. Some of these things have made it through the news here. Obviously, it's a lot louder in the States because Ben and Jerry's is such a cultural icon, and Ben hasn't stepped away, but he is beating his own drum in terms of what he thinks should happen with Ben and Jerry's, which, you know, Ben's an activist at heart, of course, that's in his nature. So he can't not, stand for something. But for us and for me, I guess on an individual level, it's, after reading the book Double Scoop, they're just such icons who reinvented the way business operated back in 1976, kind of before it was cool, before B Corp and all these other, ESG kind of trendy things. Like, they've always done business differently, and it's incredibly sad to lose them. But also, they've had such a good innings. They've dedicated their life to this work. And if anything, I just see it as, people always need to step away and enjoy, their life and have some time to do the things that they've always wanted to do and pass the responsibility onto the next generation. And I definitely feel that we don't want to, they've got us this far. I want to maintain their legacy and make sure that we keep fighting the good fight like they have for, the past few decades. So it's a moment of change, but at the same time, with change comes opportunity. And yeah, it's going to be, as of, next year, we'll be the standalone Magnum ice cream company, and who knows what that will bring. But at the same time, Ben and Jerry's is underpinned by that sale agreement and our independent board, who, have a lot of, who are just such, I guess, staunch upholders of the Ben and Jerry's legacy and our social mission. And it's interesting, when I said I got this role, and people are like, oh, you've sold out and you go into the corporate world and all of this. And I was like, to some degree, yes. But at the same time, like you said, it's such a unique position. And I think that more business needs to be like Ben and Jerry's. And how do Ben and Jerry's set a example of how it can be done within, the modern corporate structure? It'd be nice to be independently owned, or owned by the world or whoever owns Patagonia these days, but that's a very unique business model. So how can you operate within the parameters of, the modern corporate capitalist system? It's not easy, but I feel like, more people and more brands, businesses push against that mold and try and, like B Corp is doing, redefine the way we do business.
100%. And I think that, being told that you're selling out by going to corporate, I think that's quite a traditional view, because surely we need the power of business to get back to the roots of what business was there to do in the first place, which is to create value, real value for society. And that's exactly what Ben and Jerry's are doing in a very, very distinctive way.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Hilary, I'd love to bring it back to you, Hilary the activist, and ask you to, fast forward, let's say over the next 5 years, 2030, whether you're working at Ben and Jerry's or whatever it may be, what, clearly your focus is now, around climate action, efforts for systemic change. What would your dream be? What might the world look like in Hilary's idealistic dream in 2030?
Well, I guess the optimist in me would like to think that we've solved all the problems, we've taken the action we need to take, and where there's still a lot more to do, but we've, I guess, we're on the way. We're decarbonising. We're phasing out fossil fuels, and we've started repairing the planet instead of just extracting from it. But I'm also I try and be optimistic. I'm a stubborn optimist, but at the same time, I think the reality will be quite different. And I think that this work will be more important than ever in terms of the decade of action. And if we miss our chance this decade, we're just going to be working with even more disaster and whatnot, looking into the 2030s. But I think for me, it's also trying to find that balance. I'm a huge fan of Bob Brown, and I love how he encourages us to live and play and laugh and love, and not just, we need to fight for a better future, but at the same time we can't put our life on hold while we do that, because we're in it for the long haul. And I look to people like Bob Brown and the late Jane Goodall and Sir David Attenborough and just think, I want to be doing this my whole life. So that means, taking it easy in terms of not completely burning yourself out and going hell for leather and, and choosing to walk away because it's just unsustainable. So I hope that in 5 years, my life looks somewhat similar in terms of finding constantly trying to find that balance between, work and life and travel and exploration and spending time in nature and spending time with friends and family and living, but also fighting and maintaining the work. And I think it's about building community and belonging as well, because to your point earlier, like, it is those kind of grassroots, in-person, smaller conversations and things that really shift the dial in a meaningful way. So who knows what I'll be doing. I would love to be full-time at For Wild Places at some point. At the moment, we're very far from that. So 5 years, it might take a few more years for that to be a possibility. But I really enjoy, I guess, doing this work. And I guess the beauty of For Wild Places is that there's so much freedom that comes with that, in terms of we are a small, nimble organisation that allows us to jump on things and to bring new people into the tent. But also we've got huge plans at Ben & Jerry's in terms of the work we're doing in Australia and abroad. So I also don't want to miss out on that. So if we could find a bit more time, in the day to fit all this in, Caroline, it would be lovely. But yeah, I think part of me, it's a bit like COP. Part of me hopes that things are better, but realistically, I think that things will be the same, if not worse, in terms of our outlook for the future and the world that our next generations are going to inherit. So yeah, I see it as a long slog. So I don't want to burn myself out. I want to take time to enjoy it along the way, but also, keep shifting that needle forward.
And that's a realistic view as opposed to an idealistic one. But I'd also say there is a domino effect, isn't there? And sometimes you can just get to a certain point where suddenly that change happens. And I know we've been hoping to get there for a long time, and there's been pushback. But part of what I love about hosting this podcast is talking to people like you and seeing, leaders and businesses who are rolling up their sleeves and doing things, on climate action. I don't know if you've heard of Paloma's salon. Do you know Paloma Garcia?
No.
So and I'll link in the show notes to this, but she was a guest maybe last year sometime, and she runs a hair salon. She's a climate activist. And when she went to an event, started learning about what was happening, and decided that, she couldn't walk past it. And so she started by getting a climate action expert in to train her hairdressers. She now trains other hairdressers to speak to their clients about what actions they can take. And as she said, you don't speak to every client. She actually trains them on, to who to identify who would be open to it. So it's like things like that that you can see people who choose love, not necessarily over money, but right alongside it. And the more we have that in business, the more likely we will start to see more positivity. So
Definitely.
thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. It's so heartening to, hear how you as an activist who had really started going down the track of politics sees the opportunity for business and the vehicle it can provide for creating this sort of impact. And most importantly, for choosing love of planet and people over love of money. Obviously, money is a part of how we live, but I think it's really inspiring to hear what you said at the beginning of this. So I would love to ask you, Hilary, to close out the show with any final words that you have, and also to add to that, for listeners who care about climate action as much as you do, what is one simple action that they can take today?
Yeah, well, I'm guessing this episode will be coming out before the end of the year or next year?
Possibly just at the end of the year.
Okay, great. Well, I guess as we've just started, we're in summer now. It's a time of year where, for better or for worse, the realities of climate change are very apparent, from heat waves to flooding to, the inevitable bushfires that we will have. So I think that it's also a time when we often catch up with family or friends or people we might not have seen in a while or people we see all the time. And I think that I just encourage people to have those conversations in whatever way feels comfortable to you, to, I guess, not be necessarily alarmist about it, but just the more that we can interweave what is happening in the world with the opportunity we have to do something about it is so important. And, we love talking about the weather. We love, having these conversations, and often I feel like a bit of a broken record because it's like, oh, it's so hot today. Yeah, it fills me with anxiety because I think, oh, it's perfect conditions for a bushfire. I go off on a tangent, but how can you have that in your own way that, I guess, puts you out there as someone who cares and as an ally, because there might be others who think, oh, I feel the same way. What can we do about it? And back in my early days, I had a friend who was my climate action buddy, and we'd go along to things together and be curious together. So I think it's being open to, well, first of all, knowing that you're not alone in feeling these feelings, but finding people around you, whether it be at Nippers or in your book club or your workplace or your family, who are like-minded, and then going on that journey together to take action. Because like I said, we need to have fun at the same time, and we have fun when we're spending time with people we love. So how do we combine those two things to interweave this into our everyday life, like the amazing Paloma in her hair salons? That's just so fantastic. So yeah, the more we can talk about this and normalize it, the better. And I feel like we're definitely on our way there. And this time of year, it's at the forefront of all of our lives. So making the most of that opportunity to, yeah, like I said, keep the connection between what we're seeing and experience and climate change at the forefront of our mind.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?